2024 has been a weird year for movies. There have been some things about this year that just felt off to me in certain ways. It's probably because of the lackluster movie releases for me and all the bad shit I saw this year. But something about this year has been feeling off to me more than ever. But I also think it's because the movies that I was excited to see this year just did not excite me whatsoever and just ended up being so disappointing, like Kung Fu Panda 4 and Drive Away Dolls. But let's be positive through this video, since it's a top 10 video and all that. Now, like last year, I have not seen every movie that came out this year, like Memoir of a Snail, Lisa Frankenstein, Megaopolis, though from what I've heard of friends, it's actually not that good, A Royal Pain, etc. But I do want to mention some honorable mentions that I saw. There are only 2 honorable mentions on this list, so there's no honorable mention thing, whatever, so let's just get this over with. Transformers 1 was one of the surprise watches of this year for me. I am not the biggest Transformers guy on the planet, though I have been watching Transformers Animated and it's pretty good so far. But this movie had a strong story that kept me engaged. I seriously cannot stress how much I really enjoyed how they handled Optimus Prime and Megatron's relationship in this movie. It was really worth it. The Fall Guy was also a pretty good movie that had some great action scenes, but was elevated by showing more respect for stunt actors and all that they go through for the movies we love, especially in our current predicament in the film industry. Okay, top 10 time. I think it's no shock to people that Sonic 3 was one of my most anticipated movies of the year. Not as a moviegoer, but as a Sonic fan, as expected. I overall thought that this was the best Sonic movie so far, but still falls short in a few areas. Like the previous films, I really liked the designs of the characters. They look similar to the game characters, but different enough to distinguish them. Shadow was probably my favorite part of the movie overall. He gets some moments to shine with him and Maria. I also think Keanu Reeves did a fantastic job voicing him. This is also a faithful adaptation of Sonic Adventure 2, with it also having its own feeling to it. I like that they did more with Shadow and Maria, showing us their life together, making the moment she dies a lot more impactful. I also like that the human stuff, while not fully gone, is less prevalent than the first mid-second movie. The action in this movie is better than the previous films, where they play a lot more choreography and camera position than in the previous movies. I also think that the fan service in this one's a little better than the previous movie, with stuff like the Chow Garden and musical cues like Live and Learn. My problem with this movie is that the pacing can be a little too fast at times. It feels like we go from scene to scene at a pace where we can't really slow down. Even scenes that feel like they're gonna be slow go at a faster pace than what I normally expect. Thankfully, not every scene is like this, but it also goes into my other problem with the movie, and it's that I think it still has some of that kiddified humor that the previous 2 movies had. It's not as bad as the previous 2 movies, like there's no flossing, thank god, but some scenes you can still feel it. I overall had a great time with this movie, and I am excited to see what else they would do. Also, the post-credit scenes are actually fucking legendary, not gonna lie. Inside Out 2 is probably the movie I was the most shocked by when I finished it. This film does a great job at the one aspect of the original that I adored, which was the world of the film. 2 expanded it in a natural way, like it's obvious that there should be a vault containing our deepest secrets, a sarcasm, brainstorming, and how this movie portrays anxiety. I think the one thing this movie did better than the original was how it handled Riley. Riley in this film felt more like a character than in the first movie. It really helped the conflict in this movie more than if it was the first movie. I really like the new emotion in this film. Embarrassment is definitely my favorite of the new ones, but I have to give props for how they handled anxiety in this film. She's the film's antagonist, but her intent isn't malicious whatsoever. It's just she could be a bit over the top at times, and it hurts Riley in the long run more than the short run. My only criticisms with this movie is that I think the middle of the movie can drag on a little bit in a way it didn't in the original movie. I am not the biggest fan of the side characters. None of them are all that memorable aside from the Blue's Clues stand-in, but none of them really compared to Bing Bong in the original film. And I just didn't find the movie overall all that funny compared to the original, which I would argue had a perfect blend of comedy and somber moments. But overall, Inside Out 2 is still a great movie that is definitely worth existing. After I saw it, I said I would be down for another sequel, and I still stand by that. Wicked was one of the most surprise releases for me this year. Now, I am not the biggest fan of the musical, unlike most people, but I will stand by the fact that the first act of musical by itself is great and can work as a movie, and behold, the final product was actually great. I was a little skeptical with some acting decisions, and while some like Michelle Yeoh were a miss in my opinion, the rest of the main cast really blew me away. Shoutouts to Ariana Grande as Glinda. She really gave the best performance in this movie, with Cynthia Erivo as a close second. The set design in this movie is amazing, just so many things they made that makes this movie feel like it takes place in the world of Oz. The sets also sell the spectacle of the movie, which is a plus, since the spectacle is one of the many reasons I believe the original musical to be so well beloved, for a good reason, and all leads up to Defying Gravity, which left me feeling like I ascended. I was also surprised by how good the music numbers were in this movie. I already liked the songs in Act 1, but watching this movie gave me more appreciation for songs like The Wizard and I and Dancing Through Life. I was a little skeptical of the extra time this movie was getting, since normally that makes the pacing more off than it should be, but the stuff they added in this movie really did enhance the story for the better. What really holds this back for me in terms as a movie is that the lighting in this movie is genuinely some of the worst lighting I have seen in a movie. I think you know all the reasons why almost everyone who saw this movie have said this, but I can't emphasize that it makes musical numbers like Dancing Through Life more gross looking. There are some actors who I would switch, like Michelle Yeoh and Jeff Goldblum. I also think some music numbers just don't do much in terms of choreo and blocking like The Wizard and I. But other than that, I had a great time with this movie, and I am content with just watching it without needing a part 2, but damn, I hope part 2 is an improvement over the original Broadway musical. If people say cats aren't the cutest creature on earth, I'm gonna show them this movie and they will change their mind. Flow is one of the most visually gorgeous movies that I've ever seen. It has fantastic effects animation. The water looks so incredible. They do incredible things with the camera that makes it feel so immersive at times, and the lighting was superb. I speak highly of the animation in this one since it utilizes environmental storytelling. Almost every location that these animals go to are important to the story in some way. The animals in this movie do not talk, and I think it is for the better. Talking animals is overused and rarely ever works for emotional moments, I would say. In Flow, the animals never peep a word. It is just the natural noises that they make. But they are able to convey so much emotion from their noises, body language, and facial expressions, showing us that movies with no dialogue have a place in film as a medium. I also am just a sucker for the found family trope, so it hit all the emotional beats for me. I will say that the ending is somewhat confusing. I don't really want to spoil the ending since it's the ending, which is also funny to me since the ending has the most visually gorgeous scene in the entire movie. But other than that, I highly recommend watching this movie. It is basically Moana but with non-talky animals, and it is great. There is something crazy about this year in film when there are two movies I saw where someone opens their chest. This movie and I Saw the TV Glow. Maybe it's just me. Anyway, Monkey Man was a great time. I had little knowledge of this movie going into it, aside from the fact that it was being directed by Dev Patel. I was also a little afraid of this movie being somewhat of a John Wick ripoff, but color me surprised, this movie surpassed all my expectations I had. Dev Patel was a great actor in this, but also a somewhat good director. The way the action is shot in this movie is very mesmerizing. How they utilized almost everything in the set for weapons and how much the camera moves. It was captivating. I do like that the first act establishes the character, and it gets into the setup towards the first action scene with the setting and all the ins and outs of the people in this setting. Even for as corny as it can be, I like the heart of the message in this movie, that you had to learn to fight with a purpose. I'd say that the first 30 to 40 minutes took a while for it to really get me into gear. I don't need constant action, but I thought that it could have been shorter. The first act had some pacing issues in the fact that it was both too fast and too slow with certain shots and scenes. And there were some lines that felt a little cheesy for what they were saying. But in the end, Monkey Man is a movie that stands out, which is honestly the best thing it can be. As someone who is a little tired of action movies, this was a refresher to say the least. One last thing, 35 minutes into the movie, I heard a song that sounded familiar, and then I realized it was the song Britta was playing in Community in Season 3 Episode 4, Remedial Chaos Theory. That had me smiling more than it should have. I Saw the TV Glow is a movie that took a little longer to click with me than it really should. Not to say that I hated the movie whatsoever. I mean, it's on the list for a reason, but I think that the message of the movie was a little too vague, I would say. It took me a few YouTube video essays to really understand it, though I will admit that was probably just a me thing, and someone else would have probably figured the deeper meaning out quicker than me. But for me, I thought that the meaning of the movie got a little messy with the TV show, the ending, and Maddie in the second act. The only other problem I have with this movie was that it was paced a little too slow, leaving me tapping my foot every now and then. But despite all of that, I found a movie that tried to do something different and really did that job well. I was engaged throughout most of the film, wanting to know what was going on with Owen and Maddie. Justice Smith and Bridget Lundy Payne both did a fantastic job in this movie, nailing the emotions that needed to be delivered. I also really loved this movie on a filmmaking level. All the shots, the composition, the clever use of colors, and the soundtrack, they all came together and complemented the story that was being told. I also like the depiction of the horror in this film. It is a psychological horror movie, characters questioning things, going crazy, and being mentally unwell. It is something I haven't seen in a movie before. This is a movie that I had quite a good time with, but I will say that's not for everyone. If it looks interesting to you, then I would say give it a shot, and I hope that you enjoy it. Not gonna lie, I didn't expect to really enjoy the Threesome movie, knowing me, but damn, Challengers was fantastic. My favorite aspect of this movie is the production side of it. I really like how creative some shots got in this movie, especially at the end of the movie with the final break match. Like the camera being the ball, the through the floor shots, and so many other ones. I also like how the characters were shot in this movie. They are immaculate looking. I now understand why people would call them hot. The acting in this movie was really natural and well performed. Shouts to Zendaya for her performance in this movie. It was hard to tell what her thoughts were when seeing the one-on-one scenes play out. I also like how the one-on-one conversations are performed. The dynamics and the way they are delivered to some extent makes it feel like a tennis match to some extent. Especially given how this movie feels as though it is saying that love is a tennis match in of itself, with the competition and how someone can change their feelings on the fly over a decision that someone makes. It made the movie so engaging for me. I'd say that the only thing in this movie that really took me off was that the pacing in this movie was a little all over the place. Not in terms of the non-linear storytelling, I thought that part was done very well, but in the fact that some scenes went on far too long. I think it mostly came down to the scenes near the end of the movie where they started to incorporate some slow motion parts that made it feel like it was going on for even longer than it should, which didn't help with the pacing whatsoever. But I had a great time with this movie and definitely put Luca Guadagnino, I am personally sorry if I screwed that up, on my radar. Like the holdovers from last year, I never wanted to give a 10 out of 10 to this movie so badly. The Wild Robot is one of DreamWorks' best movies in recent years, and I am so happy that it is getting the recognition it deserves. Now, I have never read the books, so I'll just give my thoughts on this movie as an overall movie. As typical for DreamWorks this decade, the animation in the movie is phenomenal. Just the butterfly shot alone is enough to make it one of the best DreamWorks movies in their catalog in terms of animation. The story of this movie was one that I was moved by to the end. I am a sucker for the outcast character who finds his or her place in the world, and that is what this story is about. One aspect I loved about the story is just how much time passes for the animals to grow to like Roz. It's not just a few months. No, it's about an entire year until winter. It feels natural. Speaking of the animals, we gotta talk about the talking animals part of the movie. I am normally someone who finds talking animals in animated movies to be somewhat distracting more than anything, since the actors most of the time sound like what the actors talk like. But in this movie, the talking animals don't sound bad, and there were some performances that actually surprised me, like Thinks being Pedro Pascal. But that's probably because the last thing I saw Pedro Pascal in was The Last of Us. That's a bit of a tone thing, I would say. But I think the best performance in this movie is Lupita Nyong'o as Roz. Again, I'm sorry if I screwed that up. I love how throughout the movie, she sounds less and less robotic and more like a regular person. It shows how she grows in the movie while taking care of Bright Bill and all the other animals. I have to gush about the score in this movie. It is actually one of the best film scores I have heard in recent years, with the standout scene being the migration scene, where it enhances the feeling that Roz has over Bright Bill's departure. It's so beautiful. It makes me cry every time, y'all. What keeps this one back from a 10 out of 10 for me is that the transition from the first book in this movie to the second book was definitely off. It made the transition feel more awkward than anything. But other than that, this is a phenomenal movie that was easily become one of my favorite DreamWorks movies ever made. Hope DreamWorks greenlights more Pixar movies in the future. Dune Part 2 is a movie that is unlike anything else I have seen. It is a surreal experience that comes out every few years. The overall visuals of this movie are ones that feel like they were made for the theater. Seeing all the explosions go off, the fight choreography, and effects going on just made this movie feel like a modern Star Wars movie. But the one thing I love more than the visuals of the movie is the world building. The first film already gave us a lot of stuff to learn about Arrakis as a planet, but this movie delves more into the people of Arrakis. We see so much more about the Freemen in this movie than the previous film. Their beliefs, how they handled the conflict, and all the rituals that they do, like what happens if one of their men die. Paul is a lot more interesting in this movie compared to part 1. He learns more in this movie, and we fully see the beginning of his journey of leading the Freemen and losing his mind. It's an engaging watch, and it helps that Timothée Chalamet did a phenomenal job portraying Paul in this movie. In fact, all the performances in this film were standouts. Rebecca Ferguson was also one that shocked me to my core in this movie, with how she portrayed Paul's mother and how convincing her role was. The ending of this movie is one that has left me feeling something I've never felt for an ending like it. I should be feeling excited for what Paul is gonna do, but instead I feel sad for what he has become. I cannot recommend Dune Part 2 enough. It is better than the first movie in every way. It is one of my favorite sci-fi movies. I cannot wait for Dune Messiah. Look Back shouldn't really be on this list, but for the purposes of the Oscars and other reasons, I knew that I had to put it on here. Look Back is an adaptation of a manga with the same name written by Tatsuki Fujimoto. Fujimoto is someone who knows how to write characters. In this and his other one-shot manga, Goodbye Eerie, he doesn't shy away from the more weird and dark aspects of us as humans. We are miserable creatures from a biological and psychological standpoint. We do some pretty horrendous things around us, and that includes how we can affect the people around us. But he also doesn't shy away from the things that make us unique in certain ways. We have strengths and weaknesses that show us what we are capable of. One person may be good at script writing, but not good at editing and vice versa. We look back on those moments where we lashed out or did something we never should have done. It's a sad thing about us as humans. But we shouldn't look back with anger and regret or sorrow. We need to look back with happiness, joy, and love. Look back on these moments in our lives that meant the most to us, and not the moments that leave us in a darker place than we were in before. Look back to the family that you love, and not the enemies that you made. But most importantly, don't just look back to the past. Look back to the relationships that you have made in your life, because that is the best thing to look back to. Please watch this movie if you can. It is a masterpiece and one of the best movies I have ever seen.